starts on October 1st of this year. That budget spends $3.6 trillion, of which only $2.4 trillion are going to come into the government in the form of revenue. So $1.2 trillion, or one-third of the budget, one-third is going to be have to be borrowed and paid back by people in the future. One-third of that, $1.2 trillion. So I have asked people, how much money is $1 trillion? You know, people like to cite an old saying from Senator Everett Dirksen. Many of you may not remember him. Back in the 1960s, he was the Republican leader. He is reputed to have said $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. You know what, folks? He didn't say that. He said $1 million here, $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. And now here we are 45 years later, and we're talking about spending $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. So how much is $1 trillion? Well, I had some high school classes come visit me before school ended last spring. And I asked the students that question. I said, let me give you a starting point. If you had a stack of $1,000 bills, 4 inches high, nice, freshly printed $1,000 bill. None of them have ever seen a $1,000 bill, but a stack of them 4 inches high, you'd have $1 million. They were pretty impressed with that. I said, how high would that stack of $1,000 bills have to be to total $1 trillion? Well, one young lady said, would it be about 12 inches? And a guy in the back of the room said, no, it'll be way more than that, it'll be about 20 feet. Well, at the second meeting, I gave those two examples, and somebody else said, oh, no, it'll be more like the height of the Washington Monument. And I said, well, that's a lot, because that's 550 feet high, of $1,000 bills. But I said, those of you who are going to pass your SOLs, know that $1 billion is 1,000 times a million, and $1 trillion is 1,000 times a billion, or 1,000,000 times a million. So that stack of $1,000, not $1 bills, $1,000 bills would be 1 million times 4 inches, and you can do the math. That's about 63 miles high that we borrowed against the future of our children and grandchildren in January for an economic stimulus package that simply kicked the can down the road and deferred making the tough decisions that families and businesses, large and small, and local governments and state governments are already having to make. We simply postponed some of those decisions by borrowing a huge sum of money. We didn't solve anything with that. And yet, for next year, we're going to go $1.2 trillion. And I'm critical of the last administration as well. I always vote for the tightest budget offered in each Congress. And it never gets more than about one-quarter of the members of the House voting for it. But it would require very, very tough decisions to be made. But as a result, we've had large deficits for a long time. The last 40 years, we've only seen a balanced budget 4 times. When we had a Republican Congress and a Democratic president in the late 1990s and into 2000 and 2001.
And Newt Gingrich.
And Newt Gingrich, sure. That's right. So now, never before this year have we had a budget deficit more than $500 billion. That's a lot. That's a stack of $1,000 bills. That's 30 miles high. So that's a lot of money. Never before more than $500 billion, however. From here, as far as the eye can see, and that's 10 years, because that's as far out as we budget, the federal budget deficit is never expected to get less than $600 billion in any of those years, and ending up 10 years from now, borrowing $700 billion plus in that year. This is simply completely unsustainable. It's going to have a very detrimental effect on our economy. Not just in the long term, but also in the intermediate term, because when you start borrowing that amount of money year after year after year and piling up our national debt, $11 trillion now, projected to be more than $23 trillion in 10 years, we're going to be looking at, in fact, more than 11 trillion now, we're going to be looking at higher interest rates and inflation, and we may well have the kind of stagflation that we saw in the late 1970s, for those of you who can remember that, with high unemployment and high interest rates and high inflation, and it concerns me greatly. Government spending has got to be brought under control. That's why I introduced in both this Congress and the last Congress a requirement that the federal government do what 49 out of 50 state governments are required to do by their constitutions, and that is balance the federal budget. Bipartisan. It has more than 165 co-sponsors. We need a lot more. I would encourage you about health care reform, about the federal budget, about any issue you're interested in. Also contact your senators. You only have one member of the House, but you have 2 United States senators. Be sure to write them or email them. If you don't have the means to communicate the information, communicate with them, see anybody on my staff before you go. We'll get that information to you.
There are programs that are available to make those programs workable and help those people out. But there's no reason to change the entire healthcare system, because I don't want to have the healthcare that they have in the UK. I'm 55 years old. I'm 55 years old. If I live in the UK and I need dialysis, they put me on a morphine drip and let you die. Okay? They don't treat you. If you stop talking to the healthcare providers in the hospital, they withdraw all of the support for you and they let you die. Okay, this is not the healthcare that we want here.
Thank you, Mr. Goodlatte.
As a country looking to the government for every little thing. Where does it stop? Does it stop with health care? Does it stop with providing all of the other necessities like housing? Where does it stop? When did it become a nanny state that everybody looks to the government for every little thing in life?
Plays very much into the issue of the health care reform we have right now, because I think the best health care reform that we could possibly have, and I'll bet my physicians would agree with me on this, would be to have reforms that reconnect the patient with their doctor and other healthcare provider, not just in the course of treatment, but also in understanding the difficult decisions that have to be made with reference to the cost of healthcare. So that's why I like things like health savings accounts, because you can have that major medical policy with a very, very large deductible, and the money that you put into that account to do that, and more employers are doing this, you can spend on whatever you want to in terms of choosing the health care provider that you want to have. And that is the kind of reform that I think we should be enhancing, not discouraging. And so I definitely agree with you. This is a situation where we seem to have come a long way from what a Democratic president said not that long ago when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I don't know if I can be more specific with that, but I very much share your concern. Freedom is at risk when we give more and more and more power and responsibility to government.